Hi, welcome to part 6 of the Honda gearbox change. In this final part we're going to put everything on the engine back together, so it's mainly the intake and the starter motor and little bits and bobs. So to start with, I'm just going to give the engine a quick clean up. You probably noticed throughout the video there was a ton of dirt and rubbish. We're not going to go to a massive detail, but just going to hoover everything up. And potentially one thing I could have done here was could have cleaned everything up, given it some quick rust treatment and some painting. To be honest, it might be something I'll come back to, but the base for this car was £300. It needs to last a couple of years. I'm not really worried about some surface rust like that. Okay, so we're going to put the starter motor back in, and we're kind of at a weird angle here, but basically you have to pass it back and then pass it forward. It is a little bit awkward, but you just get it in. It's obviously the same as taking it out, but the reverse. So we're going to get the starter motor put into place. Once we start to get it to put into place, we can pop the bolt in the other side to sort of start to pull it in. So that's just going to let us hook onto the thread, and then we can sort of guarantee the starter motor is not going to drop back. So we're going to tighten that up. We're just going to snug that up. Right, so we need to put these connectors back on, so we're going to zoom in a bit. We're going to put the positive connector back onto the starter motor. So we're just going to lift that over. We'll put the nut back on. It can be a little bit tricky. And then we'll tighten that up. Once it is tightened up, we need to put the cover back on. It should just flip back over. And then we're going to put the other bolt in. This one takes quite a bit of time. You remember the fun I had taking it off, so we're just going to cut to get that fully tightened up. Again, you can see the nice fun angles I was having to work with here. Okay, so we're going to put this bracket back on for the battery tray. And what we're also going to do is we're going to clean up the earth strap before we put that back into place. So where some corrosion had occurred here, I just wanted to make sure all of the surfaces were nice and clean and able to conduct nicely. So we've got that back together and tightened up. Right, before we put the battery tray on, we're going to do these connectors up. So there's a connector that goes onto the gearbox here. A few other connectors that we want to sort of get done up as well. Also the gear linkages. So we're going to put the gear linkages on, and this is the point where earlier in the build, where you bagged and tagged everything, you're now going back to your labelled bags and you're finding all your bolts to put them back into place. So we're putting the gear linkage housing back in. We're going to put the gear linkages back on. In a minute we're going to be grabbing our washers. You see me use an old split pin. I replaced it with a new split pin a bit later on off camera. I had to wait for them to come in when I was working on everything. Right, so we've got all the gear linkage bracketry tightened up. There's another connector back here, so we're going to put that back on and also put it back into place. Now the gear linkage washers. And split pin. And just for illustration purposes, although this one wouldn't go through properly, I'm just going to put it into place. And I'll come back and address this at a later point. Okay, so we're going to put the wiring harness back into place, so these little clips will go back in. At this point as well, before we put the battery tray back on, we're going to fill the gearbox oil up, because we want to have the access to get the filler tube down. So I just bought a pipe from a DIY store for this. So this plug comes off with, I think it's the 1/2 inch or 3/8, and got the official Honda gearbox oil. So putting the right stuff back in. I'm going to put the amount of oil that you need to put on screen. So what we did with this is I've run a hose up from the engine bay onto a funnel and filled it up to the required amount. So you just take your time doing this, but it won't take too long at all. Then once you are done, we'll do that sump plug back up. Right, so that's the last of the gearbox oil going in. And just where you get to about where you should be, it will start to overflow ever so slightly. So we're going to put the plug back in, tighten that up. Okay, next slave cylinder, so we're going to put the boot back on. We're going to get the slave cylinder into place. Obviously make sure it goes into place with the fork as well. Then we're going to tighten these up. Okay, there's one of the water hoses going to go on. So we'll get that into place, and then we will get the spring clip over. So I probably am using the wrong tool for spring clips, but they seem to work for me. So we can put that hose into its bracket. We can put this hose on. So we broke this when we took it off with the spring clip broke. but I'm going to use a worm clip. Now the battery tray goes on. Again, could have cleaned this up, but wasn't too worried about it. I'm going to tighten that down. And another bracket we need to put back into place for the slave cylinder. Okay, now the intake manifold, reverse of taking it off. Can be fun to line it back up, but it's not too bad to be honest. We took the dipstick out, so put that back in. Won't cover this too much, but basically intake manifold into place, tighten up the 7 bolts. There's the brackets that are on slightly lower as well. That's just one of the bolts on the other side. There was a bracket for the dipstick, I'm not sure I caught that on camera, putting that one back on. And then there's the bracket for the wiring harness as well. That's the bracket for the wiring harness back in place, so now we can move back onto on top. Okay, so there's some vacuum hose lines to put on. So there's a top vacuum line hose, there's one at the rear, so we take the screwdriver out and put that on. There's actually another one at the back as well. We've put the throttle cable back in, we're putting the throttle body back on. Again, this is one of the handy points when you take these things off. If you keep all those bolts in labelled bags, it makes this stage much easier. We're going to put these connectors back on. There's one throttle body just there. There's the lower one, we're going to hook that one round out the side. And then that connects at the back, and the other one's for the airbox. We'll put that on in a minute. So we're going to put the airbox on, push this into place. Be careful to make sure that the vacuum hose is connected here and the airbox, and there's no gaps because of the engine sort of hiccup as such if you do it up without, as I found out. The airbox mounting points need to be tightened up, and then there's the snorkel that goes through to the air feed, and we're going to put that on as well. With the airbox back in place, there's a connector at the rear of it that needs to be connected. So there's the connector next to the airbox, and there's the connector on the airbox. Put the battery back in place, so we're going to put the battery tray in, pop the battery in, and then there's the clamps to hold the battery in place. We're going to tighten them down, battery secured, do the negative first, and do the positive, get that tightened up. And because it's been a while since the car's been started, we've not put coolant in yet, but I just want to see if it starts, and I'll shut it down straight away. And yes, the car does start, fantastic. So, vacuum hose I mentioned that I forgot to connect, that came up with an error light, needed to clear that with tonque, Android app. And then this part here, for the vacuum hose, I needed to just spring clip up, and also the airbox as well. So when I started the car, I could hear it sort of having a bit of a vacuum and an air leak as well on the intake. Tightened these up, cleared it with the tonque ODB2 app, and it was fairly happy. Okay, so we need to fill the coolant system up. So using pretty decent coolant, so we're using a 50-50 mix with the water and the coolant. I'm not going to go through the bleeding process, it took quite a while. Also turned out that probably sitting for a few months with no coolant on it, the thermostat had gone, it was on its way out anyway, so I had to replace that after. But basically I went 50-50 on the coolant, bled the system, got it up to temperature, make sure there was no more airlocks or anything in there, and then we put the cap back on and we were done. So the very final thing we need to do is to put that scuttle back on. So we need to reconnect the washer lines. We'll put the driver's side scuttle on and get all these bits and pieces back into place. Now I've not put any clips back on here yet, but it does sit in place fairly happily. The wiper, I'll make sure of that. Put the passenger side scuttle back on. We need to connect the washer as well. Put the little panel on that came off at one point. Okay, so what you could do, as I mentioned here, we need to put these trims back on, but you can sort of see down by the strut towers there's some little pop rivet parts that can go back on. You can get those fairly cheaply, and that just secures that in. And then the final thing we need to do is put the wiper arms back on. So roughly position these, tighten them down. Once you have got them in place and tighten them down, go and test how they work, make sure they're lined up properly, because you might need to take them off and move them a centimetre up or a centimetre down. And the final thing is we're going to put the engine cover on. So with that, we're ready to give the car a test drive. So this is now done. So as I mentioned in an update video, the Jazz has been used since last August now, so it passed its MOT back then. It's been doing really well. It's been used on my daily work commutes on occasion, so that's an 80-mile round trip. It's been used by my wife, who uses it to take it to work and back. All in all, it's running fine. The big improvement with the gearbox is that you don't get the loud input bearing noise that we had when we first got the car. The only real issues I had with this project, a couple of self-inflicted, was the drive shaft issue, A, not getting them out, and then B, going through a number of drive shafts because of the circlips were going. In manuals it is explained that you should replace these circlips. I think quite often a lot of people can get away with not replacing them, but for whatever reason just tearing through them. Other things would be having the right tools, so extensions, the wobble joints, the gearbox sort of jack thing that I made, the engine support, all of those things made this job a lot easier, but you could do them without. It would just be a bit more of a pain in the backside. Okay, and that's it for the Honda Jazz gearbox replacement series. I hope you've enjoyed this if you've watched it. If you're considering taking it on yourself, hopefully this gives you some pointers. There's a lot of resources out there, things like the Haynes manual. There's a lot of Honda guides online as well. I just wanted to create something that sort of went piece by piece what I went through to get this done, so you can sort of see if you're doing it yourself, if it's something you want to take on, if it's something you want to leave. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button. Please comment with any thoughts or feedback down below, and more than anything, thank you for watching.